A faint cry broke the silence of the snowstorm that had just stopped. The cry pierced through the girl's restless sleep as she slept for the first time at the farm. At first, she thought it might be the wind playing with her ears, but the sound suddenly echoed, causing the girl to crawl out of bed and look through the crack of the door. She was shocked and couldn't believe her eyes when she saw in the distance a yellow mother dog holding 10 newborn puppies. But she didn't know that they were abandoned by a billionaire in grief in the middle of the harsh snowstorm. In the quiet outskirts of rural Montana, a fierce snowstorm raged across the land. It was the kind of cold that made trees groan and the wind whistle through every crack in the farmhouse windows. Whirls of snow caught in the moonlight, shifting in ghostly shapes against a night sky drained of color. Amid this relentless storm, a desperate figure staggered along a lonely stretch of road. Sadie, a once proud golden retriever now thin with exhaustion, moved through the deep snow with single-minded determination. She carried a tiny whimpering puppy in her mouth. 9 more puppies trailed behind her, shivering and stumbling, their paws sinking into the icy drifts. One of them let out a faint cry, quickly lost in the roar of the wind. Sadie, hearing her pup's distress, paused and looked back, her warm brown eyes blazing with maternal concern. Despite her shaking legs and the snow crusting around her fur, she nudged each puppy closer together before pressing on. Only a few hours earlier, Sadie had been a resident of the Griffin estate, perched high upon Aspen Hills. The mansion, a symbol of grandeur with its marble floors and crystal chandeliers, belonged to Grayson Griffin, a man once celebrated for his philanthropy and success. Since his wife Victoria's passing, however, he had gradually retreated into bitterness. Victoria's death had stolen his warmth and replaced it with an icy detachment. No longer the kind-hearted soul who had once embraced rescue animals, Grayson became a man who wanted to erase all reminders of his grief. Sadie had been Victoria's cherished companion. She had accompanied Victoria through her battle with illness, lying by her side when she felt too weak to stand. She had greeted her joyfully on better days, guiding her through the garden and resting her head in Victoria's lap on quiet evenings. Even the staff at the Griffin estate knew that Sadie was far more than a pet. She was a source of constant comfort. For Victoria, Sadie was living proof that unconditional love truly existed. But after Victoria's funeral, everything changed. Grayson, consumed by sorrow, saw Sadie not as a link to the woman he loved, but a burden. His scorn only grew when Sadie gave birth to 7 puppies. Their presence in the once immaculate estate turned the sorrowful hush of the mansion into a place of whimpering pups, scattered blankets, and new vet bills. Each invoice reminded him of Victoria's absence and his own emotional void. One cold morning, with snow already drifting over the estate's trimmed hedges, Grayson made a decision. He called his butler and groundskeeper into the study, the dying embers in the fireplace casting an eerie glow across the shelves of unread books. "I want them gone," he said, his voice shaking only once, though whether from sorrow or frustration no one could tell. "Sadie and all her puppies. Remove them from the estate, far away." The butler's eyes widened and the groundskeeper's mouth twitched in dismay. They knew it was cruel. Winter was bearing down, and Sadie had only just given birth weeks earlier, but neither could bring themselves to refuse Grayson. The memory of Victoria's kindness warred with their loyalty to a master who was now only a hollow shell of who he once was. After a tense silence, they nodded, resigned to obey. A few hours later, in the back of the estate's weathered pickup, Sadie lay beside her puppies. She didn't understand why they were being loaded into the truck. She only knew that the warmth and familiarity of the estate was disappearing behind them. The puppies, bundled in a thin blanket, whimpered as the truck sped off down the winding road. Snow began to fall heavier, swirling in gusts, as the truck came to a remote stretch of countryside near an old wooden barn. The groundskeeper's stomach churned with guilt as he lifted the puppies out and placed them in the snow. Sadie jumped after them, letting out a plaintive bark that echoed across the barren fields. Hesitating one last time, the groundskeeper whispered an apology she could never understand and climbed back into the truck. The engine's roar faded into the swirling whiteout, leaving Sadie and her litter alone in a place they had never seen. Although Sadie was trembling with cold, her first instinct was not to curl into a ball, but to shield her puppies. She nudged them beneath her body, trying to provide even a hint of warmth as the snow clung to her golden coat. She gazed into the hazy darkness, eyes scanning for any light or shelter. The biting wind stung her nose, and each breath felt like shards of ice scraping her lungs. Yet she refused to surrender. She had to keep moving, or they would all freeze. In the distance, a faint glow flickered. Sadie, summoning her last reservoir of strength, gently picked up the weakest puppy in her mouth and began trudging through the deep drifts. The others followed, their tiny bodies nearly disappearing under the rising snow. Step by agonizing step, Sadie approached the source of light, a broken-down barn standing near a modest farmhouse. By the time she set the first puppy on a bit of straw near the barn's entrance, her heart was hammering and her vision blurred from exhaustion. She needed to return for the others. Again and again, Sadie braved the storm to bring each of her puppies to the barn's meager shelter. Meanwhile, inside the humble farmhouse, Sophia awoke to a groan. She was sleeping alone on the family farm for the first time, usually coming here to work during the day and going home to sleep in town more than 20 miles away. Tonight, the 20-year-old volunteered to look after the farm because her father had been hospitalized after he had injured his horse while shoeing it that afternoon. Most of her days were spent tending to the dark brown stallion and tinkering with minor repairs. The howling wind often made strange noises at night, but this time there was something different, a soft but urgent groan. Sophia wrapped herself in her sheepskin coat, groping her way to the door. When she looked through the crack of the door, she couldn't believe her eyes. She rubbed her eyes to see better and saw a yellow mother dog holding a newborn puppy in her mouth. What shocked her even more was when she looked down at the mother dog's feet. There were 9 tiny puppies whining weakly and huddled together in a circle. Almost immediately, she opened the door and ran outside, even though the wind almost knocked her back. At that moment, the mother dog placed the pup she was holding in her mouth down among her siblings, collapsing and gasping for breath. She blinked, disoriented, as the puppies huddled against her belly for warmth. "Good heavens," Sophia whispered, kneeling down. The mother dog blinked at her, eyes filled with a mix of relief and terror. Sophia's heart twisted at the sight. Each puppy looked so fragile that it might not survive the hour in the frigid cold. Without hesitation, Sophia scooped the first 2 puppies into her arms, cradling them against her chest, and rushed them inside the barn. She had an old crate filled with straw for her chickens, and she gently laid the pups inside. Dashing back out, she did the same for the others, each trip searing her lungs with the cold. Finally, she carefully lifted Sadie, who was too weak to stand. She was heavier than Sophia expected, likely from the clumps of ice and snow weighing her fur down, along with exhaustion. "I've got you," Sophia murmured as she carried Sadie inside. She slammed the barn door shut to keep out the worst of the storm. But she quickly realized the barn itself was only marginally warmer than the outside. She hurried back to the farmhouse, retrieving blankets, hot water bottles, and any spare towels she could find. If she did nothing more, these puppies would not last the night. Sophia cleaned out a large wooden box near her fireplace and padded it with towels. She lit the fire, stoked it until it roared, then returned to the barn for Sadie and the puppies. Soon, mother and pups were curled up together by the fire's warmth. The puppies whimpered and snuggled into the softness of the blankets. Sadie's eyes flickered open. She looked at Sophia as if to say, "Thank you," before collapsing into a much-needed sleep. As Sophia settled onto a nearby chair, relief coursed through her veins, she observed the mother dog's collar. Tarnished but still elegant, the words, "Sadie, love from Victoria," were clearly etched. Sophia gently touched the name Victoria, feeling a pang of curiosity and concern. Who was Victoria, and how had Sadie ended up in a storm like this? In the days that followed, Sophia devoted herself to nursing Sadie and the puppies back to health. She bathed Sadie with warm water, careful not to stress her further. As the layers of dirt and ice washed away, Sadie's golden fur began to regain some of its natural shine. The puppies, each distinct in color shading and temperament, gradually found enough strength to nurse. Sophia named them in her heart, though she told herself she wouldn't get too attached. There was Buddy, the most curious. Daisy, who was gentle and liked to nuzzle Sophia's hand. Milo, full of mischief, and so on. But each day made it harder not to love them. Sadie's recovery, however, was the biggest challenge. She had clearly suffered from malnutrition before her abandonment, and the ordeal in the snow only worsened her condition. Sometimes she would whimper in her sleep, as if haunted by a memory. Sophia guessed that Sadie had belonged to someone well off. No ordinary family could afford such a custom-made collar. But why would a wealthy person leave a loving dog and her litter to freeze? 10 miles away was a large manor, majestically perched on the highest hill in the land, the Griffin estate of Montana's richest family. Sitting in a large study was Grayson Griffin, his eyes on the marble fireplace, flames dancing on the walls, illuminating leather-bound books and expensive artwork. Yet the space was painfully empty. On the mantelpiece was a portrait of Victoria, smiling serenely, with all the warmth and compassion that once filled the manor. Grayson stared into his glass of whiskey, the amber liquid refracting the light of the flames. He found no peace in the silence. Memories gnawed at him. Victoria stroking Sadie's fur, the puppy Sadie once had been when they first adopted her, and Victoria's final request that he care for the dog she loved so dearly. He had promised, of course. He had done so to comfort her in her last weeks. But in his grief, it felt impossible to keep the dog that reminded him so forcibly of what he had lost. And so, he'd abandoned Sadie and her puppies. It was necessary. He tried to convince himself. They were a burden. However, guilt had already taken root. He saw Sadie's pleading eyes in his dreams. He heard the tiny whimpers of the puppies. He imagined Victoria's expression if she knew what he had done. All of that made him look visibly older, with his long unshaven beard and bloodshot eyes with dark under-eye skin from many sleepless nights. After taking care of Sadie and the 10 puppies, Sophia relied on the clue of the dog's collar with the name Victoria engraved on it, determined to find out why they abandoned the dogs in such a cold winter night. That morning, she told her father, Mr. Carter, about the dogs and asked him about a person named Victoria, possibly a rich woman. Mr. Carter was quite surprised that his daughter had saved the dogs last night. He said that 10 years ago, he went to make horseshoes for the Griffin estate and was told by the workers at the estate that there was a lady, Victoria, who is famous for her kindness. She and her husband always helped people in need, as well as stray animals. Hearing those words made her wonder if Lady Victoria at the Griffin estate was Sadie's owner. But when she thought back to the miserable situation of the mother dog and the 10 puppies last night, she was determined to find the truth. Mustering up all her courage, she drove through the gates of the Griffin estate and up the winding driveway to face Grayson. Her knuckles rapped loudly on the massive doors of the mansion. The door was opened by a man with a sad face. Grayson was surprised to see a stranger. A small woman in old boots and an old coat, her cheeks rosy from the cold winter air. She introduced herself and told him that she had found a golden retriever named Sadie, along with 10 puppies, nearly dead in the snowstorm last night. Grayson stiffened. "I don't know what you mean," he muttered, not meeting her gaze. Sophia narrowed her eyes. She had expected remorse, but no. Sophia continued, "Your staff told me they were following your orders, and I found a necklace that said, 'Sadie, love from Victoria.' You left her in a storm." Grayson's facade cracked. He grimaced, turning his gaze to the portrait of his wife. "She was Victoria's dog," he said quietly. Sophia could see the pain etched in his face, but anger flared in her as she thought of Sadie's suffering. Victoria must have loved Sadie deeply to give her such a beautiful collar. I can't imagine she would have wanted you to leave them to die. He stood there, silent, shoulders tense, perhaps out of shame, perhaps out of sorrow. At last, with a tremor in his voice, he asked, "Are they alive?" "Yes," Sophia answered, her tone softened by the genuine worry she detected. "But just barely. I've been caring for them at my farmhouse." Grayson nodded, swallowing hard. He seemed to struggle internally. For a moment, Sophia thought he would simply close the door. Instead, he inhaled slowly and said, "You saved them." Sophia met his eyes, still furious but also seeing the torment. "Somebody had to," she said. Then she turned to leave, uncertain if there was any point in talking further. Before she could step off the porch, Grayson's voice halted her. "Wait," he said. The single word carried with it weeks of pent-up regret. Thus began a conversation that would mark the start of Grayson Griffin's redemption. Over the next hour, Sophia detailed Sadie's condition and the struggles the puppies faced. She described their progress, how she'd fed them from bottles when Sadie was too weak, and how, night after night, she had stayed up to warm them by the fire. Grayson listened, expression grave. When Sophia mentioned the veterinary bills, his eyes flickered with something akin to responsibility. "I want to help," he finally said. "Tell me what it will take to make it right." Sophia's anger remained, but she also believed in second chances. They need medical care and a safe place to recover. They need food, vaccinations, everything. Grayson nodded. "I'll arrange for a veterinary team to come immediately. And I'll write a donation to the local rescue organizations." Suspicion lingered in Sophia's mind, but she saw sincerity in his voice, a quiver of emotion that suggested he was ready to face the consequences. "All right," she said. "They're at my farmhouse. You can send the vet there." The next morning, a team of veterinarians arrived at Sophia's property, bringing supplies, medicine, and plenty of questions. They sat up in the living room, carefully examining Sadie and each puppy. As it turned out, the puppies needed booster shots, deworming, and supplements. Sadie herself was severely underweight and had frostbite on her paws. The vets worked diligently, and throughout it all, Grayson stood off to one side. He offered no excuses, just asked if there was anything more they could do. For days, Grayson returned, sometimes with additional supplies, other times just to see how Sadie and the puppies were faring. Slowly, Sophia's guarded demeanor began to soften. She noticed how Grayson knelt down to let the puppies crawl across his lap, how he gently stroked Sadie's ears and spoke to her in a quiet, remorseful tone. Each act of kindness was a step away from the man who had abandoned them. Sophia could only hope he was sincere. Within a few weeks, Sadie began to regain weight. Her coat grew glossy, her eyes more alert. The puppies thrived, chasing one another across the farmhouse floor and tumbling into Sophia's arms with excited yips. By the time the snow began to thaw, all 7 were brimming with vibrant energy. Sophia, though fond of every single one, knew they needed homes that could give them individual love and attention. So she began to find families in the nearby community, willing to adopt them. One by one, the puppies left. Buddy went to a couple with 2 energetic children. Daisy was adopted by an elderly couple seeking companionship. Milo ended up with a family whose laughter could be heard across the fields on bright mornings. The remaining puppies also found ideal matches: a firefighter, a school therapy program, and so forth. Every new adoption day ended with a blend of sadness and joy. Sophia would hold each puppy, whisper her farewell, and watch them bound into the arms of their new families. Sadie seemed to understand too. She'd nose each pup goodbye, as if wishing them well in the next chapter of their lives. By the time 6 puppies had been placed, only one remained, a quiet little male pup with soulful brown eyes. He stuck close to Sophia, curling at her feet whenever she read by the fire, trailing behind her whenever she fed the chickens. She called him Lucky for surviving such a perilous start. With each passing day, Sophia realized she couldn't give him up. Sadie and Lucky had become part of her life in a way she never anticipated. Grayson continued to visit, no longer simply overseeing the puppy's progress. He began asking Sophia about her farm, offering to help with small repairs. Sometimes he would sit beside the fireplace with a cup of tea, looking less like the resentful millionaire and more like a man quietly searching for belonging. On one such evening, Grayson confessed that he'd once been involved in animal rescue himself. Back when Victoria was alive, together, they'd fostered animals at the Griffin estate, though the memory of that time was bittersweet. Sophia listened with empathy. She saw tears rim his eyes as he spoke of Victoria's final days, of how Sadie would rest her head on Victoria's lap to offer comfort. "I failed her," Grayson said, voice choking, "when I abandoned Sadie and the puppies." "You're making it right now," Sophia replied gently. "That counts for something." Over the subsequent weeks, Grayson's transformation went deeper. He not only funded local animal shelters, he started volunteering, cleaning kennels, donating blankets, paying for surgeries for strays who arrived injured. Word spread across the region of the reclusive millionaire who had emerged from his sorrow to champion the cause of abandoned animals. Some whispered that it was Victoria's spirit guiding him. Others simply believed that once he faced his guilt, he was free to do good again. Sophia, meanwhile, found her once quiet life filled with companionship. She woke in the mornings to Sadie's gentle nuzzle and Lucky's enthusiastic tail wagging. She worked her farm with renewed energy, no longer weighed down by solitude. On weekends, she invited local families over to check on Sadie's health or to see how Lucky was growing. Sometimes Grayson would stop by, quietly standing next to Sophia as they watched Sadie scamper across the yard with her pup. Eventually, spring arrived, melting the last vestiges of snow and transforming the frozen fields into a patchwork of green. Wildflowers bloomed along the fences, and the air smelled of fresh earth. The horrors of that brutal winter storm seemed a distant memory, replaced by hope and warmth. Sadie now darted about the farm, chasing Lucky through rows of budding plants, her golden coat radiant in the sunshine. Sophia sat on her front porch one evening, watching the sky turn shades of pink and orange. Sadie rested at her feet, while Lucky curled up beside her. Grayson joined them, settling into a wooden chair. They spoke in low tones about everything and nothing, how the puppies were thriving in their new homes, how the local shelter was expanding with Grayson's donations, and how life's hardships sometimes opened paths to unexpected blessings. Glancing at Sadie, Sophia recalled the day she had first heard those whimpers in the storm. In saving Sadie and the puppies, she had found her own life renewed, and Grayson, though haunted by regret, had found redemption in caring for them. "Victoria would be proud," Sophia said softly, breaking a comfortable silence. Grayson looked at the horizon, a slight tremble in his lips. "I hope so," he said. She loved Sadie like family. She always believed love was about sacrifice and caring, no matter the inconvenience. Sophia nodded. She was right. And Sadie proved that better than anyone. Crawling through the snowstorm to save her puppies, she never gave up on them. A hush fell over the porch, broken only by the distant clucking of Sophia's chickens settling in for the night. Sadie and Lucky dozed, their sides rising and falling in a peaceful rhythm. Grayson exhaled slowly, as though releasing the last of his burdens into the quiet evening air. Somewhere on the far side of the fields, the newly adopted puppies were each living out their second chance at life. Buddy romping with his new siblings, Daisy bringing warmth to an elderly couple, and the other pups likewise finding their place. The community, once unaware of the quiet woman living alone on the farm, now visited often, drawn by the story of survival and second chances. Sophia, once resigned to solitude, had become the center of a small web of kindness that spread with every wagging tail. And Grayson? He was no longer the bitter man who had cast out Sadie and her puppies. In their rescue, he found his own. His days felt purposeful, filled with tasks that honored Victoria's memory rather than shunning it. Sadie's existence no longer haunted him. Instead, she reminded him of the capacity for forgiveness. Even the Griffin estate, once a mausoleum of grief, started to open its doors again, to rescue events, charity auctions, and local fundraisers for animal welfare. On the porch, as dusk fell completely, Sophia flicked on a lantern. Stars emerged in the sky, twinkling in patterns that seemed endless. The warm glow illuminated Sadie's silver collar, still tarnished, but shining enough to display Victoria's inscription. Grayson leaned forward, gently running his thumb over the letters. "I can't undo what I did," he murmured, "but I can spend the rest of my life trying to honor her and you for saving them." Sophia placed a hand over his, a gesture of understanding. "We can't change the past, but look how far we've come." They sat there side by side. As night enfolded the farm, Sadie stirred in her sleep, letting out a content sigh, and Lucky nuzzled closer to her. To Sophia, it felt as though the wind had finally stilled, and the warmth of the coming summer was already in the air. She closed her eyes, grateful for the journey that began on the bleakest of nights, because it had led them all here, to a place of connection, renewal, and love. In the soft glow of the porch light, one can see the silhouettes of a new family formed not by blood, but by compassion. A grieving man finding hope, a gentle girl with a kind heart, and a golden retriever mother with a loyal puppy, all testifying to an unbreakable bond. And somewhere far away, a woman named Victoria is watching all their actions, who once whispered, "Take care of her, Grayson," believing that love will ultimately triumph over even the coldest winter storms. If you were Sophia, what would you do? Which city are you listening to the story in? Please comment and let us know. And don't forget to subscribe and like to continue with the next interesting stories.